The strange rental offer. Jack stepped off the transport ship, stretching his arms. The alien planet of Tyra 7 was not what he expected. The air smelled strange, a mix of metal and flowers. The sky was a deep purple with two suns glowing far away. He adjusted his backpack and checked his holopad. "Find a place to stay. Don't waste credits," he muttered to himself. Jack had been traveling for months, moving from one planet to another. He wasn't rich. He couldn't afford fancy hotels. He just needed a cheap room for a few weeks before his next job. He opened the local rental listings. Most were too expensive or full of strange rules. But then he saw it. Large room for rent. Cheap. Quiet. No contract needed. Come quickly. Jack raised an eyebrow. That sounded too good to be true. He tapped on the listing. The location was close, just a few streets away. The owner's name was Vecta. No other details. He hesitated for a moment, then shrugged. Might as well check it out. The alien landlord. Jack found the house easily. It was tall and dark blue, built with smooth alien metal. A strange symbol was carved above the door. He knocked. The door opened almost immediately. A tall alien woman stood there. She had grayish-green skin, 4 glowing yellow eyes, and long silver hair. She wore a long robe, and her hands were folded in front of her. "Are you Vecta?" Jack asked. The woman gave a small smile. "Yes. You are here for the room." Jack nodded. "Yeah. The ad said it's cheap." "Why?" Vecta tilted her head. "It is just a big house. Too empty. I need someone here." Jack looked past her. The house was clean and quiet. Too quiet. But the room looked nice, and he really needed a place. "How much is the rent?" he asked. "Very little," Vecta said. "You pay half now. Half later." Jack frowned. This was getting weirder. "What's the catch?" Vecta hesitated. "No catch. Just one small thing. My daughter comes with the room." Jack blinked. "Excuse me? An unusual condition." Vecta sighed. "My daughter, Rilke. She stays here too. She is young, but she will not disturb you." Jack laughed nervously. "You're saying, if I rent the room, your daughter is part of the deal?" Vecta nodded, her expression serious. Jack was confused. Was this some strange alien custom? Maybe she just wanted someone to look after her daughter. He scratched his head. "Okay," Jack said slowly. "As long as she stays out of my way, I guess it's fine." Vecta smiled. "Good." She stepped aside. "Come in. I will show you the room." Jack stepped inside. The air smelled different, like a mix of spice and metal. The house was neat. No signs of a child living there. "Where's your daughter?" he asked. "She is resting," Vecta said. "You will meet her soon." Jack looked around. The place felt too perfect. No noise. No dust. No mess. It didn't feel lived in. Vecta led him to a door. "This is your room." Jack stepped inside. The bed was large. The walls had strange glowing symbols. A small window showed the purple sky outside. "It's nice," Jack admitted. "Too nice for the price." Vecta placed a small black device on the table. "This is the key. It will lock and unlock your door." "All right," Jack said, setting his bag down. "Thanks." Vecta nodded. "You should rest. You had a long journey." She left the room, closing the door behind her. Jack sighed and sat on the bed. Something felt off. But maybe he was just tired. He lay back, staring at the ceiling. "It's just a room," he muttered. "Nothing weird about it." Then a soft voice spoke from the darkness. "You need to leave," the voice whispered. Jack sat up, heart pounding. "Who's there?" A shadow moved near the corner. A girl stepped into the dim light. She looked mostly human, except for her glowing yellow eyes and slightly bluish skin. She was young, maybe 15 or 16. She had dark hair and she wore a loose, simple outfit. Jack stared at her. "Are you Rilke?" She nodded. Her eyes were full of fear. "You need to leave," she whispered again. "Before it's too late." Jack frowned. "What are you talking about?" Before she could answer, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Rilke's eyes widened in terror. She shook her head quickly. Too late. Jack felt a chill down his spine. Something was outside his door. Something big. And it was coming closer. The hidden truth. Jack's heart pounded. The heavy footsteps outside his door stopped. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Rilke stood frozen, her glowing yellow eyes wide with fear. She held up a finger to her lips, signaling Jack to stay quiet. Jack didn't know what was happening, but his instincts screamed at him. Something wasn't right. The room suddenly felt colder, like the air had been sucked out. Then, a deep, inhuman breath came from the other side of the door. "You need to leave," Rilke whispered again, her voice trembling. Now, Jack wasn't sure if he should listen to her or demand answers, but before he could decide, a sharp claw scraped against the door. Jack's pulse jumped. His body tensed. He wasn't armed, just a traveler, not a fighter. The scraping sound stopped. Then, after another moment of silence, the footsteps slowly faded away. Jack let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What the hell was that?" he hissed. Rilke didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him toward the window. "You don't understand," she said urgently. "You were never supposed to come here. My mother shouldn't have let you in." Jack yanked his arm free. "Okay, stop. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I want answers. What's going on? What was outside that door?" Rilke glanced toward the hallway, as if afraid something might return. She swallowed hard. "You're in danger," she said. "But not just you. Me too. My mother. She's not telling you the truth." Jack narrowed his eyes. "The truth about what?" Rilke hesitated, her hands clenched into fists. "About why she needed a human in this house. The contract he never read." Jack felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He thought back to the rental deal. Cheap price. No contract. It had seemed like a good deal at the time. Too good. "Start explaining," he said. Rilke took a step closer, lowering her voice. "This house, it's not just a place to live. It's a trap. And the thing outside your door, it comes for people like you." Jack frowned. "People like me? You mean humans?" Rilke nodded. "Yes, that's why my mother put up that listing. She didn't just want a tenant. She needed a human." Jack's jaw clenched. "For what?" Before Rilke could answer, the door creaked open. Jack's body went stiff. He turned slowly. Vecta stood there. Her glowing yellow eyes didn't blink. "Is something wrong?" Her voice was calm, too calm, like she already knew what they had been talking about. Jack felt the tension in the air. His instincts screamed danger. But he forced a casual smile. "No, just getting to know my new roommate." Vecta's eyes flicked to Rilke. Then, after a long pause, she smiled. "Good. You should rest. Tomorrow, I will explain everything." She stepped back into the hallway and closed the door. Jack and Rilke were left in silence. The real reason he was here. Jack turned back to Rilke. "I don't trust her." Rilke nodded. "You shouldn't." Jack exhaled. "All right. Tell me everything. No more secrets." Rilke hesitated, but then she took a deep breath. "There are creatures that hunt my people," she said. "We call them the Dravok. They come at night. They cannot be stopped. Not by weapons. Not by force." Jack frowned. "Then how are you still alive?" Rilke bit her lip. "Because humans keep them away." Jack's breath caught. "What?" Rilke nodded. "Your kind has something. Something that hurts them. I don't know what it is, but when a human is near, the Dravok stay back. They weaken. They fear you." Jack let that sink in. So that's why your mother rented me this room. Yes, Rilke said. She's using you as protection. As long as you're here, the Dravok won't attack this house. Jack felt anger rising inside him. She tricked me. Rilke looked down. Yes, but she had no choice. Jack scoffed. No choice. She could have just told me the truth. Rilke's face darkened. Would you have come if she did? Jack opened his mouth to argue. But then he realized she was right. If he had known some shadowy creatures wanted to kill them, he would have run the other way. Rilke sat down on the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees. You should leave, while you still can. Jack rubbed his face, frustration burning in his chest. I just got here. I'm not running yet. Not until I know everything. Rilke's eyes met his. Then you need to be ready. Because once the Dravok know you're here, they won't stop coming. Jack swallowed. His gut told him she wasn't lying. This was just the beginning. Outside the window, the sky darkened. The second sun dipped below the horizon. The deep purple clouds turned black. And in the distance, Jack saw something move. Something watching the house. Something waiting. The unseen threat. The night settled over HFY, casting long, eerie shadows across the landscape. The second sun had fully disappeared, and the deep purple sky had turned nearly black. Jack stood by the window, his breath slow, his body tense. Out in the distance, something moved. At first, he thought it was a trick of the dim light. But then he saw it again, a shifting, unnatural shape, barely visible in the darkness. It wasn't walking. It wasn't crawling. It was gliding. A cold shiver ran down his spine. Rilke, he said, his voice low. What? What am I looking at? She stepped beside him and looked out. The moment she saw it, her face paled. The Dravok, she whispered. Jack's stomach clenched. You mean those things that are supposed to be scared of me? Rilke swallowed hard. Yes, but they're watching you now. Jack didn't like the sound of that. How many are out there? He asked. Rilke didn't blink. Just one. Jack exhaled. Then what's the problem? Rilke turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. One means they're testing you. They always send one scout first. If it survives the night, the others will come. Jack's chest tightened. You mean, if it doesn't retreat, Rilke said grimly, they'll know you're not a threat. Jack clenched his fists. Damn it. This was worse than he thought. The creature in the distance stood still now, its form barely visible against the dark landscape. But Jack could feel it watching him, waiting. And then, it moved. Not away. Toward the house. The first encounter. Jack backed away from the window. Nope. Nope. I am not doing this. Rilke grabbed his arm. You need to stay here. If you run, it will chase you. Jack glared at her. And what happens if I stay? It just knocks on the door and asks to come in. Rilke shook her head. No, it will try to break in. It wants to see how strong you are. Jack's pulse pounded. You're saying I have to fight it. You don't need to fight, Rilke said quickly. You just need to stand your ground. If you show fear, it will attack. If you let it near you, it will sense your weakness. Jack took a deep breath. He had been in dangerous situations before. Pirates, smugglers, corrupt security officers. But this was different. This wasn't some thug with a blaster. This was a monster, and it was getting closer. Rilke pulled him toward the door. Come on, we need to go downstairs. Jack hesitated. Why? Because, she said urgently, my mother will be waiting. The landlord's secret. Jack followed Rilke down the quiet hallway. The house was eerily silent, and for the first time, Jack realized something. There were no other people here. No neighbors. No distant sounds of a busy town. It was like this place was completely isolated. He wasn't sure if that made him feel safer or more trapped. They'd reached the main living room. Vecta stood near the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her. Her glowing yellow eyes met Jack's. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked. Jack nodded. "Yeah, a shadowy thing. Gliding. Not exactly friendly looking." Vecta sighed. "Then it has begun." Jack narrowed his eyes. "You knew this would happen." "Of course," Vecta said. "That is why I brought you here." Jack folded his arms. "All right, enough with the cryptic talk. If humans scare these things, then why is one walking toward this house like it's no big deal?" Vecta hesitated, and that's when Jack saw it. For the first time since he had met her, she looked nervous. "I was afraid of this," she said finally. "They are adapting." Jack frowned. "What do you mean, adapting?" Vecta turned to face him. "The Dravok have hunted my people for centuries. But when humans arrived in this sector, something happened. The creatures reacted differently. They couldn't go near your kind. They grew weaker in your presence." Jack nodded. "Okay, so what changed?" Vecta's expression darkened. "They are learning," she said, "finding ways to resist your effect. And now, they are testing you, to see if you are truly a threat." Jack's stomach twisted. "So if I fail," he said, "they realize I'm not a problem. And then what? They kill all of you." Vecta didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Jack already knew the truth. The showdown begins. A sudden noise made them all freeze. A scraping sound. Jack's blood went cold. It was at the door. The three of them turned slowly. The front door rattled. Then, a deep guttural whisper. "Hugh, man." Jack felt his skin crawl. The voice wasn't natural. It was too deep, too layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. Rilke grabbed his arm. "It's calling you." Jack swallowed hard. "Yeah, I got that." Vecta moved toward the door. "Stay back," she warned. "Do not speak to it." Jack didn't argue. The door trembled again. The shadows outside shifted unnaturally. The air inside the house grew thick, heavy, as if something unseen was pressing against them. And then, a long clawed hand pressed against the door. Jack clenched his fists. His body screamed at him to run, to get out of here. But he didn't. He stood his ground. And then, to his surprise, the shadowy hand flinched. For a moment, the thing outside hesitated. Jack's breath caught. It was working. He took a slow step forward. His heartbeat hammered in his ears, but he kept his voice steady. "You don't belong here," he said. "Get lost." The Dravok hissed. The shadows outside shifted violently. Then, just like that, it was gone. Silence returned. Jack let out a shaky breath. "Did we just win?" Vecta shook her head. "No," she said quietly. "We bought time. But now they know you're here." Rilke's face was pale. "The next time, they won't send one." Jack clenched his jaw. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The first attack. The silence after the Dravok vanished was heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Jack stood there, fists clenched, staring at the door as if the shadowy creature might return at any second. His heart was still racing. The thing had flinched when he stepped forward. But why? What was it about humans that made these things hesitate? He turned to Vecta. "Start talking. Now." Vecta's yellow eyes flickered with something. Concern, hesitation, maybe even fear. "You did well," she said, "but this is far from over." Jack exhaled sharply. "Yeah, I figured. How long until they come back?" Rilke spoke up before Vecta could. Her voice was barely a whisper. "They won't wait long. Maybe an hour, maybe less." Jack cursed under his breath. "Great. So what's the plan? Because I don't intend to stand here all night waiting for round 2. Vecta motioned for them to follow. "Come with me. There is something you must see." Jack hesitated, but when Rilke followed her mother without question, he decided to go too. Vecta led them down a narrow hallway. Jack noticed something strange as they walked. The walls weren't normal. At first glance, they looked like smooth metal, but as he ran his fingers along the surface, he realized the material was slightly warm. Almost alive. Jack frowned. What is this house made of? Vecta didn't look back. Something older than you. Older than me. Jack didn't like that answer. They reached a locked door at the end of the hall. Vecta placed her hand on a scanner, and with a soft hiss, the door slid open. Inside was a circular chamber, dimly lit by a faint, pulsing blue light. In the center of the room stood a massive, ancient-looking machine. Jack stepped inside cautiously. The air smelled metallic and charged, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. "What is this place?" he asked. Vecta placed a hand on the machine. "This is why you are here." The truth about the Dravok. Jack ran a hand through his hair. "I'm getting really tired of vague answers. Explain." Vecta sighed. "I told you before, humans repel the Dravok. But I never told you why." Jack folded his arms. "I'm listening." Vecta nodded toward the machine. "This is a bioresonance stabilizer. It generates a protective field that keeps the Dravok at bay. Or at least it used to." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean, used to?" Rilke spoke up, her voice soft. "It's failing." Jack swore under his breath. "So let me guess. Humans naturally generate this protective field, don't we?" Vecta nodded. "Your biology is different. Something in your DNA produces an energy that disrupts the Dravok's connection to this reality." Jack frowned. "Wait. Their connection to this reality." Vecta placed a hand on the machine. "The Dravok are not like us. They do not belong here. They come from somewhere else, a place of shadow and hunger." Jack felt a chill crawl down his spine. "You're telling me these things are from another dimension?" Vecta nodded. "Yes, and they feed on life. Not just bodies, but souls. They drain their victims until nothing remains but an empty shell." Jack swallowed hard. "And humans stop them. How?" Vecta's gaze was steady. "You disrupt their link to their world. They cannot touch you without pain. You are poison to them." Jack thought back to what had happened earlier. The creature had flinched when he stepped forward. "So that's why you needed a human here," he muttered. "Because your machine can't protect you anymore." Vecta gave a slow nod. "Yes." Jack paced for a moment, absorbing the information. "All right. I get it now. But there's a problem." Vecta tilted her head. "What problem?" Jack stopped pacing and turned to face her. "If I was such a big threat to them, why did that thing come so close?" The Dravok adapt. A heavy silence filled the room. Rilke looked at her mother. "He's right." Vecta's lips pressed together in a thin line. "I feared this would happen." Jack's stomach twisted. "What?" "Feared what?" Vecta met his gaze. "The Dravok are changing. They are learning how to resist human energy. That is why the scout came closer. It was testing its limits." Jack exhaled sharply. "So what happens when they figure out how to ignore me completely?" Rilke's voice was barely above a whisper. "Then nothing will stop them." A loud crash suddenly shook the house. Jack spun around. What the hell was that? Rilke's face went pale. "They're already here." The attack begins. A second crash echoed through the house, followed by an inhuman shriek. Jack reached for a weapon. Except he didn't have one. "Vecta, tell me you've got guns in this place." Vecta's expression was grim. "Weapons will not work on them." Jack clenched his jaw. "Then what do we do?" Vecta motioned toward the machine. "If we can recharge the stabilizer, it might push them back." Jack moved fast. "How do we do that?" Vecta turned to Rilke. "Get the core crystal from my chamber. Now." Rilke nodded and ran down the hallway. Another crash. The walls shook. Jack turned to Vecta. "How many are out there?" Vecta's glowing eyes darkened. "Too many." Jack looked around the room, searching for anything that could help. Is there another way out of here? Vecta shook her head. If we run, we die. We must stand our ground. Jack cursed under his breath. Great, just great. Then, with an ear-splitting roar, the front door shattered. A wave of darkness poured into the house. Jack barely had time to react before they came. The Dravok had arrived. The truth about humans. The front door exploded into splinters, the wood and metal disintegrating as the Dravok surged into the house. The creatures didn't walk. They flowed, their forms shifting like living shadows, their eyes glowing a sickly pale green. Their movements were unnatural, too smooth, too silent, as if they weren't bound by the laws of physics. Jack barely had time to react before one lunged at him. His instincts screamed at him to run, but something inside him, something primal, held him in place. The first contact. Jack raised his hands defensively as the creature's elongated claws slashed toward his face. The moment they got close, just inches from his skin, the creature let out a horrifying screech and recoiled. Its blackened flesh sizzled and cracked, as if just being near him was burning it alive. Jack's eyes widened. Vecta had said humans repelled them, but he hadn't really believed it until now. The Dravok staggered back, its body twitching violently, struggling to hold itself together. Jack clenched his fists. So that's how this worked. Come on, then, he growled. Try again. The creature shrieked, its unnatural voice shaking the walls. More of them poured into the house, gliding across the floor like sentient smoke, their jagged limbs twitching, their hunger radiating through the air. Vecta's voice was sharp. Stay near me. Jack backed up toward her, his pulse racing. Any updates on that machine of yours? Rilke's voice came from down the hallway. I'm almost there. Jack turned back just in time to see the Dravok shift tactics. Instead of attacking him directly, they went for Vecta. Jack moved without thinking. He stepped between them, blocking their path. The moment his body stood in their way, the creatures howled in agony. They flinched back, their limbs contorting unnaturally. Some tried to claw at the floor, as if scraping at reality itself. Jack smirked. Oh yeah, you don't like that, do you? The truth revealed. Vecta stared at him, her 4 glowing eyes widening in shock. It's stronger than I thought, she whispered. Jack shot her a look. What's stronger? The effect you have on them, Vecta said, stepping closer. You're not just repelling them, you're breaking them. Jack's stomach twisted. What does that mean? Vecta hesitated. It means you are different from other humans. You are not just an obstacle to them. You are. She trailed off, her gaze unreadable. Jack scowled. On what? Vecta didn't get a chance to answer, because at that moment, the Dravok changed tactics again. They learned fast. One of the creatures let out a guttural growl, its body twisting in unnatural ways. Its form began to morph, shifting rapidly, its body stretching, its limbs growing longer. Jack's breath caught as he realized what was happening. It was adapting. The Dravok stared at him, watching, calculating. Then suddenly, it lunged again. But this time, it didn't stop. It still screamed in pain, but it pushed through it. Jack barely dodged as razor-sharp claws slashed through the air where his head had just been. His pulse skyrocketed. Vecta. They're not scared of me anymore. Vecta's expression turned grim. No. They're resisting you. Jack stumbled back as the creature lunged again, this time faster, its form twisting unnaturally. It was learning how to ignore his effect. This wasn't supposed to happen. Desperate measures. A sudden burst of blue light erupted from the hallway. The machine. Jack turned to see Rilke rushing into the room, holding what looked like a glowing crystal core in her hands. The crystal pulsed with energy, its light casting strange shifting shadows across the walls. She was out of breath, her face pale. I got it, she gasped. Vecta grabbed the core and jammed it into the machine. For a moment, Nothing happened. Then, the walls trembled. The air crackled with unseen energy. A pulse of light erupted outward, blasting through the house like a shockwave. Jack felt it hit him, a strange warmth spreading through his body. The Dravok screamed in agony. Their bodies convulsed, their limbs twitching violently. Some of them collapsed instantly, dissolving into thin air. Others staggered back, hissing, their forms flickering like broken projections. Jack turned to Vecta. What the hell was that? Vecta's face was unreadable. A temporary fix. Nothing more. Jack exhaled. So what now? We just wait until they try again. Vecta studied him for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, "No, now we need to prepare you." Jack frowned. Prepare me for what? Vecta's 4 glowing eyes met his. For war. The bigger picture. Jack didn't like the sound of that. Hold on. War. I just wanted a den room to rent. Vecta sighed. You were chosen for a reason, Jack. Not just because you're human. Because you are something more. Jack's frustration boiled over. I'm sick of all this cryptic nonsense. Just tell me what's going on. Vecta hesitated. Then she slowly placed a hand on his chest. Jack flinched. Because the moment she touched him, he felt something. Something inside him. Something powerful. Vecta's voice was quiet but firm. You are not just human, Jack. You are a key. The last of your kind to carry an ability long thought lost. Jack's breath caught. What ability? Vecta's gaze darkened. The power to destroy the Dravok completely. Jack's pulse pounded. His mind raced. This wasn't just about renting a room. This was about him. Who he was. And why the Dravok were so afraid of him. The final stand. Jack stood there, his mind spinning, his body still tingling from the strange energy blast. Vecta's words echoed in his head. You are a key. The last of your kind to carry an ability long thought lost. Jack clenched his fists. That sounds like some prophecy nonsense. I'm just a guy who needed a room. Vecta shook her head. No, you are more than that. Rilke stepped forward, her glowing yellow eyes filled with worry. Jack, you're the reason the Dravok fear humans. Jack exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. All right. Fine. Let's say you're right. What does that mean? I don't feel special. I don't have powers. And those things are adapting. What am I supposed to do? Vecta studied him carefully. We need to unlock what is inside you before they return in full force, because next time, they will not just test you. They will end you. Jack hated this. He hated all of it. But deep down, he knew she was right. The Dravok wouldn't stop. They had found him. And now, they wanted him gone. The ritual. Vecta motioned for him to follow her deeper into the house. Jack exchanged a look with Rilke before sighing and stepping forward. This better not involve chanting in a dark room. Vecta's lips curled slightly. It does. Jack groaned. Of course it does. They reached another locked door, different from the others. This one was older, covered in strange symbols that glowed softly as Vecta placed her hand against it. The door shuddered, then melted away into mist. Jack hesitated before stepping inside. The room was circular, the walls covered in ancient carvings. Strange blue flames hovered in the air, flickering without heat. At the center of the room was a raised platform, and at the center of that platform was a floating stone. Jack frowned. What is that? Vecta's voice was calm. The reason you are here. Jack stepped closer. The stone pulsed softly, like it was breathing. It gave off a faint hum, and somehow he could feel it calling to him. Rilke stayed near the door, her expression uncertain. Mother, are you sure about this? Vecta nodded. We have no choice. Jack narrowed his eyes. No choice for what? Vecta turned to him. Touch it. Jack took a step back. Oh, hell no. Every time someone in a sci-fi story touches a glowing object, bad things happen. Vecta sighed. Do you want to survive? Jack hesitated. His gut told him this was a terrible idea. But his gut had also told him not to rent this damn room. And here he was. Slowly, reluctantly, he reached out and pressed his fingers against the stone. The moment he did, the world exploded. The awakening. Jack was no longer in the room. He was somewhere else. A place of darkness, shadows, whispers. He couldn't see anything clearly, but he could feel something moving around him, a presence. Then, out of the void, a deep, rasping voice spoke. You do not belong here. Jack's chest tightened. He tried to move, but his body was frozen. Where am I? He demanded. Between. Before. After. The voice hissed. You are not meant to awaken. Jack clenched his jaw. Too late. The darkness shifted. The shadows pulled back, revealing something enormous. A shape. A being. It was not like the Dravok. It was older. More powerful. Jack's breath caught as it looked directly at him. You are an echo. The last of the Forsaken. Jack frowned. That means nothing to me. The thing loomed closer. Then you are not ready. Jack felt something press into his mind. A weight. A force. Images flooded his vision. A burning world. A massive gateway. A battle between light and shadow. And then, he was back. His body hit the floor with a thud, his heart racing, his skin burning with energy. Rilke and Vecta rushed to his side. Jack, are you okay? Jack blinked up at them, breathing heavily. No, definitely not. He felt different, like something inside him had shifted. The power within. Vecta helped him to his feet. What did you see? Jack exhaled. I don't know, but something spoke to me. It called me an echo. Vecta stiffened. That cannot be. Jack groaned. I take it that's bad. Vecta was silent for a moment before saying, It means you are more than just human. Jack rubbed his temples. I swear, if one more person tells me I'm special without explaining why, I'm going to lose it. Vecta took a slow breath. Jack, you are not the first human to fight the Dravok. Long ago, there were others. Warriors. Guardians. They had the ability to not just repel the Dravok, but to destroy them. Jack's mouth went dry. And let me guess, they're all gone. Vecta nodded. The Dravok hunted them to extinction. Jack stared at her. And now I'm the last one. Vecta met his gaze. Yes. Before Jack could respond, a horrifying screech erupted outside. The house shook violently. The Dravok were coming back. And this time, there were hundreds. Jack felt them. Not just their presence, their hunger. But he also felt something else. Something inside him. Power. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Jack didn't feel helpless. He felt ready. He turned to Vecta and Rilke, his expression hard. No more running. Vecta nodded. Agreed. Rilke swallowed hard. What do we do? Jack clenched his fists. The air around him shimmered. We fight. And outside, the Dravok screamed. Because they could feel it too. Jack wasn't just a tenant anymore. He was their executioner. A new beginning. The night outside was no longer silent. It howled. Hundreds of Dravok gathered beyond the ruined front door, their twisted, shifting forms blending into the darkness, their glowing eyes burning like dying embers. They weren't waiting anymore. They had adapted. They had learned. And now, they were ready to kill. Jack stood at the entrance of the house, staring them down. He felt different. The strange energy inside him wasn't just a feeling anymore. It was alive. A force moving through his body. A power long buried inside humanity. He clenched his fists, and for the first time, the Dravok flinched. Not because they feared him, but because they knew. Jack wasn't prey anymore. He was something else. The final battle begins. The Dravok let out an ear-splitting screech, their bodies shifting and twisting, becoming more monstrous, more real. Then, as one, they attacked. The first wave rushed forward, their jagged claws and shadowy limbs reaching for him. Jack moved before he could think. His body reacted on instinct, his hand shot out, and suddenly the air around him ignited. A burst of pure energy exploded from his palm, slamming into the nearest Dravok. The creature shrieked as its body was ripped apart, its form dissolving into nothingness. Jack stumbled back, shocked. What the hell was that? But there was no time to process it. More of them were coming. Vecta stood behind him, her 4 glowing eyes wide. "You did it," she whispered. Jack's chest rose and fell. "I don't even know what I did." Vecta stepped forward. "Your power has awakened. Now you must use it." Jack exhaled. "All right, let's see what I can do." Unleashing the echo. The Dravok surged forward in waves, their forms shifting, twisting, trying to break through the strange force radiating from Jack's body. Jack didn't hold back. He threw out his hands, and the energy obeyed. Bright arcs of light shot from his fingertips, slamming into the creatures. The Dravok screamed, their bodies warping, breaking apart like shadows in the wind. Jack grinned. "Oh, I can get used to this." Rilke ran up beside him. "They're still coming." Jack turned. She was right. Even with the ones he had taken down, more and more poured in from the darkness. They were endless. "We need a way to stop them," Rilke shouted. Vecta's voice was sharp. "The portal. We must seal it." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Portal." Vecta pointed to the sky. "They are not from here. They are still connected to their world. If we close that connection, they'll be cut off." Jack finished. Vecta nodded. "Exactly." Jack looked up, and that's when he saw it. A massive rift in the sky, swirling like a black hole, a gateway between realities. And inside it, he saw something moving. Something bigger. Something watching. Jack clenched his fists. "All right. How do we shut that thing?" "The final sacrifice." Vecta hesitated. Jack frowned. "What?" Vecta's voice was quiet. "Only a being of great power can close the rift." Jack's stomach twisted. "You mean me?" Vecta nodded. Jack looked at the swirling void above. He could feel it, pulling at him, calling to him. The Dravok weren't just invading. They were trying to bring something through. Something worse. Jack took a deep breath. "All right, tell me what to do." Vecta's eyes softened. "You must touch the rift. Pour everything you have into it. Burn the connection until it collapses." Jack stared at her. "That sounds incredibly dangerous." Vecta nodded. "It is." Jack ran a hand through his hair. "Great, just great." Rilke grabbed his arm. "Jack, are you sure?" Jack looked at her. For the first time, he saw hope in her eyes. She had lived her whole life in fear. But now she was looking at him like he could change everything. Jack sighed. "Yeah, I'm sure." Then he turned and ran toward the rift. Closing the rift. The closer Jack got to the swirling gateway, the more he felt it pulling at him, whispering to him. The Dravok saw what he was doing and went into a frenzy. They rushed him, their shrieks piercing the air. Jack didn't stop. He raised his hand, and the energy exploded from his body, ripping through the creatures like wildfire. He reached the portal and jumped. The moment his fingers touched the rift, the world shattered. Bright, burning light erupted from his skin, pouring into the swirling void. The portal screamed, twisting violently as it tried to stay open. Jack felt the Dravok's presence collapsing, their forms fading, dissolving. They were being ripped from this reality. Jack gritted his teeth. More. He needed more power. And then, suddenly, the rift imploded. Jack was thrown back, his body hitting the ground hard. The night sky returned to normal. The air felt lighter. The Dravok were gone. Jack exhaled slowly. Well, that sucked. A new beginning. Vecta and Rilke ran toward him. You did it, Rilke said, eyes wide. Jack groaned. Yeah, I'd rather not do it again. Vecta knelt beside him. You have done something no other human has done in centuries. Jack chuckled weakly. I'm guessing that means I don't get a rent discount. Vecta actually smiled. No. Jack sighed. Figures. He sat up, rubbing his sore arms. He still felt the power inside him. But now it was dormant, waiting. Rilke looked at him. What now? Jack thought for a moment. He could leave. Go back to his old life. Pretend none of this ever happened. But he knew the truth now. The Dravok weren't just on this planet. They were everywhere. And they'd be back. Jack exhaled. Well, I guess I'm not just a tenant anymore. Rilke smiled. No, you're not. Jack cracked his knuckles. Then let's get to work. The night was quiet again. But somewhere in the stars, something watched. And it was waiting.